Hey everybody, welcome back to IDP Plus Trends. We are going to talk some defensive linemen. Right now it's redraft season. Everyone's itching for those key defensive linemen. We're going to take a look at Fantasy Pros defensive line rankings, and we're going to find some discrepancies, some guys who you should be picking on for your redraft leagues this year, guys who are underappreciated, underranked right now. Fantasy Pros is a very common, very highly touted website. So that's why we're going to use these rankings. And before we get started, I just want to mention I'm one of your co-hosts, Johnny Freakin Fantasy. You can find all our names on the bottom of the screen. I am at Johnny Freakin F1. Under me is Steve from Average Joe's Fantasy Football at AVGJoes_FF. And with us tonight, we have a special co-host. We were talking about defensive linemen, and Gary perked his ears up. So we got the IDP tipster Gary over there at IDP tipster on X. Before we get started, one more thing I wanted to mention: if you have not checked out the website Trophy Smack, please go ahead and do so, because right now, guess what, folks? It's draft season. So check Trophy Smack out. Get ahead of the game right now with Trophy Smack's gorgeous draft boards, complete with player stickers so deep you couldn't possibly need them all. And for the first time, Trophy Smack has an IDP expansion pack for all of us defensive nerds out there. So check out the link in the show and get your draft board today from Trophy Smack. So diving into these defensive linemen, we each brought 3 to the table here. We're going to spin this in multiple perspectives. It might be guys to target as your DL1, DL2, might be late round sleepers, and everything in between. So I'm going to start it off, and what I'm going to do is bring up right now our Fantasy Pros page that I referred to. This is strictly defensive linemen. We are talking edge rushers, we're talking outside linebackers, anyone who's considered a defensive lineman in mainstay platforms out there. So we might have edge rushers, defensive tackles to talk about. Everything is in play here. So I'll start it off, and one of the guys that I'm telling you to go out and draft right now is very low on the rankings, actually, number 36, and that is Jermaine Johnson here. And I'll tell you what, Jermaine Johnson is someone who 35, Jermaine Johnson. I personally think Jermaine Johnson this year should be drafted and redrafted as a top 15 defensive lineman. I mean, this guy was a first-round pick 2 years ago. It took him a while to get going last year, but, man, when he clicked, he clicked well, and I think he has high potential. He finished the season last year, 2023, with 7.5 sacks. He had 36 solo tackles, 19 assists for a total of 55 combined. He had 11 tackles for loss, an interception, a forced fumble, and a recovery on that forced fumble. And if you're someone who refers to PFF, if that's your kind of gig, it's not always true when it comes to fantasy football, but I'll put that weight on the scale here. In PFF last year, Jermaine Johnson from the Jets, he had a grade of 83, which was tremendous, actually 19th amongst edge rushers. And, that might seem mediocre, but when I go into these PFF grades a little bit more specifically, you'll see why it's tremendous to me. So last year, he had 11.3 points higher than he did in 2022. 2022, he was sitting at 71.7 PFF grade. This past year, he got bumped up all the way to 83, so it was a nice change of pace, nice positive regression for him in that sense. He was actually the number 2 ranked edge rusher from the 22 draft, only behind Aiden Hutchinson. So Aiden Hutchinson, we know, is a top 5 defensive lineman at this point. So to be number 2 behind him, you're in good status in my book already. Furthermore, Jermaine Johnson had the highest pass coverage grade in the whole entire league, in the whole NFL, with 95.1. So if you're scoring, maybe, if it's not sack heavy, if it's not tackles, if it is tackles heavy, this is a guy who is multifaceted. Of course, in leagues that have sack premiums, you're hunting him, but also in tackles too, which was why I really like him. Is I don't really like to rely on the sacks too much. We see year to year, sometimes sacks fluctuate, and it's really tough to bank on that. But I do expect him to be positive in both of those aspects, in the tackles and the sacks. I mean, he had 7.5 last year. I could see him pushing for over 10 this year, 10 or more. And I do expect the tackles, 55 last year. Maybe that stays around the same pace, but I expect it to increase at least by a little bit, maybe 60, 65. And one thing I want to mention here, in the offseason, the Jets, they signed Hassan Reddick, And this is somebody who was third in sacks in 2022 in the entire NFL with 16. So I think by signing Haason Reddick to the Jets, I think they had Bryce Huff last year, and that maybe helped Jermaine Johnson, get some solo coverage where he can do some damage in the backfield, get to the quarterback. But I think this is actually a better caliber and a more highly touted from other teams. Outside linebacker Haason Reddick, I think they're really going to double him, which is really going to let the floodgates open for Jermaine Johnson as far as those one-on-one opportunities. So, and I really like Jermaine Johnson. Like I said before, he's really well-rounded. I like the tackles, and that's something that I like to be safe on with defensive linemen. And when I look at a reference here, somebody who's in a top 15 right now on this list, top 25. You look at Alex Highsmith at 25 overall here. I think Alex Highsmith is actually another guy who's a little bit underappreciated here. But the fact that Jermaine Johnson is 10 spots behind him, I think it's not really fair to look at those two types of players and put them 10 points behind. I mean, if you look at it with tackles, last year, Jermaine Johnson had 4 games with 5 or more tackles. Guess what? Alex Highsmith had 4 games with 5 or more tackles, and he's 10 spots ahead. So I think this is a value pick here. Also, when we look at sacks, if that's what you're hunting here, he had 7 games with at least half a sack. So more, almost half the games, he's going to get you some kind of sack. So this is, again, like I said, somebody who's going to get tackles at a safe rate. He's going to get sacks maybe in an increased rate this year. So to be 35, I think this is fairly low, and I think this is a great value here as my, I'm not going to hunt him as a DL1. I don't think it's safe to call him in that top 10 range, but I do see a perfect world for him where he's in that top 15, and not only in 2024, but moving forward. So I really am excited to see the Jets line in general. I think they've done great things there. Not really excited to see the Jets play in generally speaking in fantasy football, but when we look at the defensive line, I think they've got really good pieces here, and I love Jermaine Johnson. So if I can get him as a defensive line DL2, I think that's a really good 1-2 punch for your team to start it off. So Jermaine Johnson is my number one guy. I'm going to pass it off to Steve here. Steve, who's your number one guy you got on the list?
So my number one guy is Kayvon Thibodeaux. I think Kayvon is in a situation in his 3rd year now, coming off a double-digit sack performance, which is, his first time, right? He had 11.5 sacks last season. Being ranked at 26, which I think is a little low for him. I know he didn't perform well. If you go off PFF, his grading was really low compared to his rookie season. But I think going into his 3rd season, with the addition of Brian Burns, with Dexter Lawrence there, where they're going to receive, I think, most of the attention, Kayvon's going to be in a perfect situation to have a lot of one-on-ones. I think he's going to have a slight increase in tackles, but I think he double-digit performance. And again, like everything else, everything's going to be based off of scoring, right? Like, how does your scoring perform in your fantasy? I mean, he had 11.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. He had pass deflections. He had fumble recovery. I mean, quarterback pressures, like that's a thing that matters. Tackles for losses, like those are things that people get scored on. Like in my longest IDP league I've been, tackles for loss are huge. So like those things play a big factor, could increase him, right? So I don't think the addition of Brian Burns is actually a scary thing for him. I actually think this helps Kayvon because, again, it gives him the opportunity to have a lot less pressure on him going into his 3rd season. The pressure is going to be on Lawrence. The pressure is going to be on, Burns. Allows Kayvon to have that one-on-one attention, continue to be a force, and this is, if you look at the NFC East, there's some strong offensive line that they've got to compete with. So there are some things that they've got to deal with, except for, I guess you would say, the Commanders. But both teams are very Cowboys pass heavy. We'll see how the Eagles play out with Barkley, but they tend to pass pretty heavy, right? And then now you got Jaden Daniels for the Commanders. We'll see how that performs. But this is a division that I think he has opportunity and has a lot, I think, in his way, where I think he has a chance to really succeed. I just really like the opportunities with, again, those one-on-one opportunities against some of those right tackles, maybe a left tackle here or there, because if you're your team, you're scheming for Burns, you're scheming for Dexter Lawrence, and unfortunately, you can't stop all three of these guys. And I think he's undervalued completely. I don't understand why he's valued so low. Like I looked, you talked about some big names here. Like Alex Smith, not sure why he's so high in that ranking. And there, obviously we were going to mention some great ones in this list. So he's definitely my number one that I'm going to grab for sure.
Good value there. Gary, what do you
Well, I guess I'll start off with Michael Hoecht, the edge rusher for the Rams. This guy, anybody that knows me, I've talked about him for nearly 2 years now. For a guy that started as an interior defensive lineman coming into the league, getting transformed into a starting edge rusher next to Aaron Donald, for God's sake, and getting to train next to, learn from him. I think it's a little bit disrespectful. This guy's 57th in ranking, and he slipped in ADP too in most places that I've been drafting lately. And I understand they have surrounded him with Verse and Young and Kobe Turner, Bobby Brown. All right. But you know what's missing out of what I just mentioned is anybody with any veteran experience as much as Hoecht does amongst this defensive front. I really believe that he's kind of getting ditched to the side because Verse has been added, and at the same time, Young is getting a lot more respect. If you look up there, I think Young was like, I don't know, something in the 20s or something, well ahead, And if you look at the grades, I'll tell you what, both of them, both Hoecht and Young were both just average. Young was slightly ahead of him in PFF overall, and there wasn't a big of a difference. Now, Hoecht, he actually did dive down a little bit in his PFF grade, and it showed on the field. I mean, he did damn near, he doubled his tackles from 2022 to 2023, including his sacks. Of course, he played a lot more last year, and I think when you're thrusted into a full-time role over a part-time role from 22, then when he was first learning the edge rusher position, then I think it's, you're bound to see a drop. This is an undrafted dude, I think, out of Brown University. Okay, again, an interior defensive lineman. So I think it's going to boil down to the fact is that this team has invested a lot of time and effort into Hoecht. Hoecht has stood up. Hoecht knows this defense. You've got to replace Aaron Donald. You don't need to replace Hoecht on this defensive line. You've got to get this going with some of these younger guys, and I think they're going to fit this in to where Hoecht gets put more in a position where he won't be exposed in coverage. He'll be able to get after the ball more, but he's not leaving that field. He's just going to be moved around. He's going to be helping run this defense with Ernest Jones. So I think that we're looking at more of to me, he is definitely an edge rusher too. And I think that he's got weeks that he's going to get you those low edge rusher 1 numbers, no problem. I think this is an advantage. Putting all this talent around him, these young guys, that's great. But I don't see any of them taking his job this year.
Yeah, I do like Michael Hoecht, whatever the Hoecht his name is. An important caveat for me is last year I was playing on Yahoo platform. That's where I play most of my leagues. He was actually listed as a defensive tackle. So if he still holds that tag this year, it's kind of like an extra cheat code because the defensive tackle position, if you're starting 2 or 3, it kind of gets thin there. So Michael Hoecht is definitely somebody who you want to pay attention to, and this is down in the rankings. Adjust those rankings accordingly. If he is a defensive tackle, he moves up definitely. If not, that's okay. He, like Gary made his case, he's definitely still a serviceable guy, and we're talking down here in the 50s. If you're in a 12-man league, this is defensive line 4. So these are guys who are going to go undrafted in many leagues and doesn't draw much attention, but definitely, like you said, I definitely agree that all these rookies they drafted kind of puts him in the back burner. But don't forget about him. He had a lot of tackles.
This is way more more a disappointment in ADP. So to me, from where I've been getting him in drafts, it's something to take advantage of.
Right. Absolutely, man. So I like your case there you made, Gary. I'm actually not going to slide too much further up than you. I'm going to go somebody who's also kind of like defensive lineman 3 or 4, depending on the size of your league. And that's Jonathon Cooper from Denver. And Jonathon Cooper, I don't think he gets much attention because he was a 7th round pick. But to me, I'll tell you what, I kind of get like a poor man's like Jonathan Allen from Jacksonville. I kind of get like vibes from him, and I'll tell you why. Is because maybe you're in a situation like me. I actually play in a 12-man, 6-person IDP where we start 2 linebackers and two linebackers, 2 defensive backs, and 2 ennies and 2 flexes. And actually, Jonathon Cooper was amongst the he was amongst the starter last year for a league mate in my league. And we don't even start defensive linemen. And Jonathon Cooper, this is kind of my guy because I had mentioned before, I'm not really sold in on all going in on sacks. If you want to get try to break the bank with 10 or 15 sacks, that's great if that player can do that. But I'm not asking Jonathon Cooper to do that. And I don't think he has to do that in order to provide value here. I mean, he's at 42. I'm not saying Jonathon Cooper is going to be in the top 25 or should be anything really higher than top 35. But I think when you're looking down here, you got a bunch of players like Uchenna Nwosu. He can make that jump. Ed Oliver can make that jump. Cameron Hayward's kind of is on his way out. So you have multiple facets in this 40 through 45 and 50 range. But I think Jonathon Cooper is really safe here. And that's what I'm trying to do at the defensive lineman position is stay safe. Because of the volatility when it comes to sacks. I'm not chasing it completely with him, but at the same time, I'm not foregoing it. Last season, 2023, he played all 17 games. He had 8.5 sacks, which is great for me here. Great value. You don't have to break the bank. I'm not even asking him to get more than 8.5 sacks. If he can do that, again, that's more than suffice. And the key stat here is the 44 solo tackles last year, the 28 assists combined for a 72 combined tackles, and that's terrific to me. Anytime I can get a guy at the defensive lineman position to give me about upwards of 50 or more tackles with about 7 or more sacks, that's completely playable in my opinion. And you don't even have to be in a 14, 16-man league. I think he plays in a 12 too. Maybe as a defensive lineman 2 or 3. I think 2 would be his absolute limit, the ceiling, but I think he's safe here, like I had mentioned before. I mean, when we look at the edge rusher specifically, and another reason why I mentioned Jonathan Allen is because these guys do it at both levels at a high rate. And maybe you look at the first 2 years of his career and you say Jonathon Cooper, 7th round pick, he was only playing 46% of snaps those first 2 years. That number jumped up to the 70s, 74% actually. So he actually got his shot. This is a team in Denver right now. If you look at preseason rankings, Denver Broncos are 31st out of 32 teams when we look at the power rankings for defensive linemen. So, I mean, they did add Jonah Ellis to the team, and maybe being Caden's brother, maybe he kind of provides a spark as a rookie, but I don't think Jonathon Cooper's spot is in any kind of question or concern here. I think he's actually going to get an uptick of snaps, maybe 75 to 76%. I think he showed last year he can handle it. When we look at the edge rushers specifically, he was 6th in solo tackles with 44. He was 7th in assists with 28, and his 8.5 sacks was 27th. So it's not something to hang your hat on, but at the same time, he's not hurting you in that department. And if he can even get that 10 piece, get another 1.5 sacks this year and turn it into 10, I think we're talking about a guy who's in that top 30, definitely top 35 range. So here's I'll say a quirky stat here. I had mentioned before, 46 defensive snaps from 2021 to 2022, his first and second year. When we look at that, 46% of snaps, he had 48 tackles those first 2 years there, average of 48. Then when we come to 2023 last season, he finally saw that spike. He finally got that starting opportunity. He played 74% of defensive snaps. Guess what? He had 72 tackles. So to me, the kind of I'm looking at a stat here that it really correlates with defensive snaps versus or defensive snaps, I should say, over tackles. So if he can get that upwards of 75, 76% snap share, I think this might be a guy who actually gets better in the tackle department. He might go from 72 to about 75, 76, somewhere around there. So to me, this is not somebody who you're going to break the bank with sacks. This is all about, staying modest in the position, taking advantage of an opportunity where this is late. And this is going to be a guy who you can bank on to get those tackles. He's going to get the playing opportunity. And I really like him to really stay pace of what he's been doing from the last year and bring it into this year. I mean, he was a little bit down, knocked in his PFF as far as pass coverage. But against the run, he was graded really well, and I'm not surprised with 72 tackles. So I think Jonathon Cooper is my type of player if I'm hunting tackles at this position, and I think he's fairly safe. Again, not somebody who's going to be a top 25 or higher, but I think when we're looking at 42, he gets a little bit undervalued here. So Jonathon Cooper is definitely a guy who I've already been hunting in best ball leagues that I've done, and definitely somebody when the season rubber hits the road on this 2024 season, Jonathon Cooper is a guy I'm going to be safely drafting. Is about my DL3. So I love Cooper here in Denver, albeit on a bad, what's called bad defensive line. So I think he's an outlier at the position. Steve, moving on to you for your number 2.
So you mentioned tackles. My second guy had 103 tackles in Derrick Brown for the Carolina Panthers. He's defensive lineman 28. And again, depending how you're scoring, 103 tackles is amazing. He's not a sack machine. He had 2 sacks last season. He is definitely the anchor to that Carolina defense, and really setting the tone in that defense. He grades really well across the board in PFF. Like, he is a phenomenal defensive tackle. Now, what turns people off is the fact that he's not going to get you a lot of sacks. So again, depending on how your scoring is and how that's going to be based off of, sacks are important, especially for a defensive lineman. But if my defensive lineman can get me close to 100 tackles, you're doing pretty well. I mean, 103 tackles is amazing. 7 tackles for a loss.
Oh yeah.
Quarterback hits. I mean, this kid was amazing. And if he can continue that performance, he could easily be a defensive lineman 1 for your squad, and you didn't have to break the bank to get him. Like, we all know the top 5 are consistent. You're going to have to spend a little bit to get those guys like Watt and, those type of players. But if I can draft other players, maybe in the offensive side or maybe some linebackers to shore up my defense, and I can get Derrick Brown later on, who's going to get me close to 80 to 100 tackles, who performs like a linebacker, I'm grabbing him every single time.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that, man. Even if those tackles go up a couple, you talked about 2. Those sacks come up a little bit. 2 sacks last year. Come on now, he has a chance to go 3 or 4. So, not saying he's gonna. He broke the record last year for tackles, for defensive tackle. But even if he doesn't hit 100 this year or falls a little bit short, I don't think he's going to hurt you. And when we're talking 28 here, this is deep. So I agree with you, Steve, on that. Derrick Brown definitely undervalued at 28. Gary, who's your number 2 guy?
Oh, I just want to throw in there, man. I love Jonathon Cooper. I finished up that breast cancer flagship league that you're drafting right now with me.
Yeah,
I finished him up. I finished the season with him on the roster, man. I love that. And I was sitting here looking at like Josh Sweet, Ruscio. There's quite a few guys that I'd rather have your dude than them. So yeah, I love that one. And Brown that's killer with 103 tackles, man. Mm-hmm. For defensive tackle, that's just beast mode, period. I mean, you got Christian Wilkinson came off 152, but that is such an outlier. I mean, that's some kind of record for defensive tackle. I think he just did that like a year or 2 ago. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's killer, man. I'm just going to go ahead and roll with Jalen Carter, which is one of the inside Twin Tower Georgia guys for Philadelphia. He's going into the 2nd year. He actually only started like 1 game out of the whole season. So he had some nice numbers, had some really good grades. But the nice thing about Jalen Carter, so now he's an interior defensive tackle. So we're talking about a general defensive line ranking or ADP. These guys are kind of hard. They're at that border of what kind of value they can get you. If a lot of them aren't going to hit that DL1. But, most of us need really good DL2s. And I think he's going to get a lot more snaps this year. Fletcher Cox retired. It's just him and Jordan Davis. And Jordan Davis hasn't proved to be the guy. He's actually struggled a little bit. Carter outshined him nicely last year. And when you look at that depth chart that they've got going on, I don't see anybody that's going to threaten him on the inside. I think he's going to come in there and anchor that down. He's going to hold some DL2 value. All right, so that's about as far as I'm going to go. When his ADP is clear down to, or apologies, when he's ranked, what, 62nd?
That's right.
I like him a little bit. Like, I like him better, and right above him is Dexter Lawrence. I definitely love him better than Chase Young. Yeah, my buddy, there's a few of them down there, but yeah, just get them on your radar. Don't expect don't expect that DL1. You'll be good because he'll be a solid DL2, a good rotation guy, depending where you're at on your bench. So I like him.
Yeah, man. Jalen Carter definitely get a little bit overlooked here at 62. I think this is definitely a guy who deserves attention. And 62, man, that's not even drafted in a 12-man, 4 defensive lineman platform. So definitely take advantage of that. I'd like him to have a nice year. So I'm rocking with you, Gary, on that one. Before we move into our third and final picks each, I wanted to mention that right now at IDP Plus, we are running a promo. If you are not already signed in and subscribed with our website, our platform, you can do so right now for only $1. So right now we're not just pretty faces here at IDP Plus. We don't just have great videos, great articles coming out. We have an entire suite of tools and rankings for both offense and defense, plus rookie rankings, injury trackers, snap tools, premium articles, weekly top finishes, and more. So right now, get your first month for just $1 when you use the promo code MOCKDRAFT. So go to idpguys.org, check out for your monthly subscription, and make sure you use the promo code MOCKDRAFT, and you get that first month for only $1. So moving into our third and final, take here, third and final undervalued guy. Mine is going to come a little bit kind of out of left field, and this is going to be a deep dart throw here. I'm just basically saying don't forget about this guy, because a lot of people, if you're listening to this, and especially Dynasty, I know we're talking redraft, but Dynasty guys out there are definitely salivating over this guy, and he's 146 on this list. We're looking at guys, Shy Tuttle, Travis Jones, Devon Godshaw. Well, he's his teammate. I'm rolling with Keion White on this one. So Keion White, I don't think he deserves to be in your top 3 or 4 defensive lineman slots, but I do think definitely that he should be drafted, especially if you're in a deeper defensive lineman league in IDP. And I'll tell you why. So Keion White, this will be his second year. He was a second rounder out of Georgia Tech. Some analysts actually believe that he should have been a first rounder, which speaks to, marks on his potential in the NFL. The first year when you play for the Patriots, I think Bill Belichick, definitely was there last year. But I think Bill Belichick, what he does with his guys is rookies, he brings them along slowly, and I think this was the case with Keion White. So I think a lot of people have a bad taste in their mouth about Keion White. Like, he kind of let me down last year, and they expected big things out of the second rounder, potentially first. And I kind of agree with that, but take it with a grain of salt, because the Patriots do things their own way. Now fast forward to this year, Bill Belichick is not the coach. Gerard Mayo is the coach, and I actually don't expect much to change. You had a best coach of all time, and you played for him, and I don't think he's going to flip a switch and go 180 on us. So I think things are going to kind of be similar here, but that's okay for Keion White. So right now, if you're like me, you're reading, you're searching of all these players on Google for articles, and especially a guy that was a second round last year. So this is somebody who's, I'm not looking at 35-year-old guys to make that jump. This is somebody who fits the bill. He's young. They really they have good depth there, but I don't think they have guys that are really in front of him that make it impossible for him to make that next jump. Josh Uche was also on the team, and somebody who's vying for snaps with Keion White, but Josh Uche kind of led us also with a bad taste in our mouth last year. So I think the opportunity is there for Keion White to finally make good on his second round draft capital. Last year, he played 49 defensive snaps, which is more than fine. He held his own in PFF. He could get better, as far as run support and pass coverage, but he didn't do grade bad there. He actually in run defense, he was 67.8, which is fine. Pass coverage was great. 83.8 was his PFF ranking. If that's your thing. But when I'm reading articles about Keion White, because he was so intriguing last year, I just can't forget the name. Right now, Gerard Mayo's talking about he's impressed with the kind of player that he's become. Even in his second year, he's becoming like a veteran. If you see tweets from beat writers from New England, a lot of guys had mentioned in the offseason that Keion White's kind of like pegged at Gerard Mayo's side. This is somebody who I just think you can't look in the rearview mirror all the time in fantasy. Sometimes you kind of have to make a bold prediction and look ahead. And I think that this opportunity in 2024 is going to be open for Keion White. We're talking about a guy who plays multiple positions on that defensive line. He's got great guys around him. They have great depth in New England. And the fact that he plays multiple positions, I think that he can get it at multiple levels. I think this is going to be a guy who is going to improve his tackle mark from last year, definitely improve his sack mark. He only had 1 sack last year, 26 combined tackles. That didn't play in many leagues, and only 3 tackles for loss. So really, like I said, you can't be looking in the rearview mirror with me on this one, but look ahead. And one thing I really that hits home with me, I really hang my hat on here is a lot of people are drafting. I see Matt Judon really high. Actually, Matt Judon, I believe on this list is 15. So that's even in his lower 30s, coming into mid 30s, Matt Judon is still a very respected player in fantasy, and that's all fine and dandy. And I'm not going to talk about Matt Judon much in this take, but I will say the fact that Matt Judon, if we believe he's healthy and he is back to form for this New England defense, I think he's the one that takes the double teams away and really gives a shot for Keion White to step up from a role player to more of a gadget player until he can finally break out. I think that's going to be the case here. I think we're going to look at somebody who might be a role player to start it off in the season, but just because he's multifaceted, he has that second round pedigree, he's getting praise from the coaches. I think this is somebody that we're going to see that 49% defensive snap share uptick here. And I'm really excited to see what Keion White does. If you spin it like this, if you say you have Matt Judon on the outside, then you have Christian Barmore, who I also really like when we're looking at this list, but I'm not talking about right now. You got Judon, Christian Barmore, Devin Godchaux. That really takes a lot of attention in those 3 players, and that really leaves a guy like Josh Uche potentially. So don't forget about him, but primarily Keion White, because he's so down in these rankings. This is a guy that's 146, absolutely undrafted. If you have him in Dynasty, you're probably holding hope, and for good reason. I think this year in 2024, we're going to see that really blossom. We're going to see Keion White blossom into a solid edge rusher, and I think that this is definitely a guy who needs to be rostered, but I wouldn't start him. I wouldn't lean on him in week 1, but I'm taking a bold take on this, and I expect him to make good on my words of wisdom for him and definitely be talked about when we're talking about shallow leagues next year. So if you're somebody who is in a deeper league, if you're somebody who is really trying to find the next guy, I think you, number 1, should listen to my words and my take about Keion White. Number 2, this is early. Do your research on him. See if these things translate into OTAs, into the mini camp. And I think Keion White is going to be a guy who, although not talked about much right now, is going to flip the switch, and we're going to see that come out real soon. So I like Keion White. Again, don't bank on him as your DB3 or DB4. This is a really long shot, but I think he is going to provide some good value here, and it's going to start this year. So Keion White gets my attention, absolutely, at 146. Steve, moving on to you.
So my last guy I'm going to mention, he's right now currently ranked, I think, defensive line 41, Zach Sieler for the Miami Dolphins. I wanted to mention him for a couple of different reasons. So he's not a tackling machine. He actually, regressed a little bit. He went from 70 tackles in 2022 to 63. But where he did have values, he went from 3.5 sacks to double digit in 10 sacks. On top of that, which is where I think his value is going to be very strong, is the fact that there is a lot of really concerns with this Miami Dolphins defense. They lost Chubb last season. They lost Jalen Phillips last season. And then Wilkins went to the Raiders. So that whole defensive line currently is just decimated. So Sieler comes in as pretty much their best defensive lineman they're going to have at the moment until Chubb and Phillips get a little bit healthier and possibly play this upcoming season. They both had some really bad ones, so we'll see how they perform. But Sieler's going to have strong value at 41. He's going to be a guy that could squeak into that low defensive line to mid, maybe, that will have value at that 41 spot. Looking at the list that, again, we're going off of Fantasy Pros, there's other players like Chubb is ranked higher, but he's coming off a torn ACL. Doesn't make sense, right? There's a few of these guys in here that are a little bit higher than where Sieler's at, and Sieler, I think, has an opportunity to actually outperform a lot of these guys in the rankings. So I like what I saw from him last season. I didn't watch a whole lot of Miami Dolphins. And when I did, of course, it was for Tyreek Hill and, the fun offense. But that defense and watching some of his highlights when he did perform and just where he graded, again, he didn't get the tackles that you're hoping, but 63 to 73 tackles for a defensive lineman, edge rusher, that's great. 10 sacks. He's getting tackles for losses. He's getting QB pressures. And this season, he's got to really step up. They gave him a contract extension. They believe in him. He's got a lot on his plate. He's got a lot to help his teammates around him, because he doesn't have a lot of the support right now with, Phillips and Chubb taking a lot of that pressure, or Wilkins taking that pressure. So it is going to be on him. We'll see how he performs early on in the season, but he has the opportunities. He's going to have the snaps for it. He's been their starter. He started all games last season. He started, I think, 14 to 15 in 2022. So the opportunities are there. I really like him at this ranking because I think you're going to get him at a cheap price.
Yeah, I like
my turn, right? Okay.
41.
No, all right. My bad.
No, I'm
I'm
sorry.
going to roll, brother. All right. My bad. Dante Stills, you guys might not even know who in the hell I'm talking about. He's a really deep dude, rookie from last year. Peppered this guy in. I love streaming defensive tackles in super deep leagues. I streamed the crap out of them. And this dude had a stretch between 5 and 7. That he averaged 4 tackles, combined tackles a contest. I think it was a half a quarterback hit at the time, dotted a couple of sacks in there. 6th rounder last year. All right. And this kid turned around and led the Arizona Cardinals. He started, he had 8 starts into 15 games, playing 54% of the snaps, recording nearly 50 tackles, and 19 of them for a solo. Okay, he only had 3.5 sacks, the 5 tackles for a loss. Now, his PFF grades, which we all know is not the end of lo behold, and we don't cherish. It just gives a nice way to gauge something. It gives you a little bit to look at. It's kind of like a cheat sheet for some film read, is all it really is. The guy is actually well above par in grade in pass rush, and that kind of surprised me, considering they only had 3.5. So this is the really interesting part. So this kid was a 6th rounder last year, where Jalen Carter, which we already spoke about, right? He was a 1st rounder. In the over his college career, Dante Stills had 137 total tackles in 59 games. All right. When it come to Carter, he had 83 and something like 18 something tackles for a loss. Out of 137 total tackles Daniel Stills had in his career, 52.5 tackles for loss, 1/3 of his total tackles. That is a huge number. Now, granted, this guy was in West Virginia. It is a Big 12, all right? But, he also kind of showed up last year and outplayed every veteran Cardinals defensive lineman that they had. I think a guy named Romance Lopez or something, a former Bear, was their 2nd top performing guy, a longtime veteran. He had 42 and 1 sack. So in comparability, I would have to go with, I'm going to dot this guy at the end of some deep leagues. And I think he's got DL2 upside to him. occasionally. All right. Now, if you're in those kinds of leagues where you're playing defensive end or edge rusher and designated defensive tackle, and it's one of those super deep D-Gen leagues, and this guy's going to be worth dotting on there. If nothing else, he proved to me, because I'm a big start sit guy, he proved to me that he actually, when the matchups was right and the numbers all jived, he came up gold each time that I inserted him as a streaming option. And I don't see anybody on that current roster, including Lopez. I think they added Justin Jones, another Bear, or Justin Jones. Either he's a Charger or a Bears throwback. I can't remember. And then another just a veteran, Nicholas. Yeah, he might be the former Bear. But either way, these guys are just average talents, and Dante Stills has already outperformed most of the veterans that they had last year. I have no doubt he's going to be worked into this rotation a little heavier this year, and he's got pass rush prowess. His best grade, again, not overall be-all from the PFF, was a 72. And when you kind of throw that together and you're looking at 137 tackles in college and you had 52.5 tackles for a loss, man, that's getting pressure. I don't give a shit what level of football you're playing in. So he's got a lot of upside to work with and grow into his position. And he's already hit the ground running last year. Look for him to. I could see him being one of these. Let's say McNeil from Lions, or say Marmaduke from Ravens. I think we could see this kid in a couple of years all of a sudden pop up and really catch guys' attention as defensive tackle play.
I like it, Gary. You went real deep on this one. 161 on the list. And for all those viewers, you saw me scrolling high, scrolling low. Finally found him, 161 on the list. So, again, like a Keion White at 146. Dante Stills. Gary makes a bold prediction here from Arizona, 161. A guy going undrafted right now. So, a very deep take there. I respect it, Gary. To take deep takes takes a lot of courage. So I like that. And you actually, like they say, you learn something new every day. So you put me on the Stills here. I'm going to go back and do my research after this pod on Dante Stills. So, hey, before we shut it down, anything else we wanted to mention, fellas? We had 3 each. I definitely like those takes. I know we didn't stop and take a minute to smell the roses. Jonathon Cooper, Gary, I appreciate you giving me a shout out on him. Anything else we want to say or missed?
I can name off a couple of guys I think are going way too freaking high in these rankings. You guys got anybody? Share with me. You guys have been knee deep into this all season, folks. I haven't podcasted in 4 months, so it's like I'm rusty. I haven't had to grind on like these guys. I've been doing some other things with the IDP Plus. So. I mean, give me a couple of your guys before I give you mine, man. Who is high on here?
Who is high on here? Let's take a look. Well, I was going to say an honorable mention for me would be Ellis. I like Ellis from Denver. I'd like to pair him up with Jonathon Cooper. If I can get Ellis late, I think his father played in the NFL. This is Caden Ellis's brother. So now he goes to a defensive lineman ranked 31st for Denver. So I think Ellis there, the rookie, can actually make some noise, especially when you look at Drew Sanders, who got hurt. So that's an honorable mention for me. Steve, did you want to give an honorable mention if you had one?
I wouldn't say necessarily an honorable mention, but, we talked about really high. Like, I think Joey Bosa, is way too high.
Yeah.
I think he's probably one of the most overrated, defensive players in general. I think it's all name-based at this point.
Yeah.
He hasn't been relevant in years. I think Joey Bosa is just way too high for me right now. I would not spend the money on him in my draft picks. I'm going to hold off.
Yeah.
It's too much.
They've got him above Gary.
Yep.
Matt,
Yep.
Thibodeaux. I mean, he lost that step like 2 years ago.
Yeah, that
was my big one. I was like, what the hell is that about?
Yeah, he hasn't been relevant in a long time. I'm actually surprised Bradley Chubb is still ranked pretty high, coming off of an ACL.
Yeah, he just won't go away, will he? He keeps coming back and getting
Yeah.
like 5-6 games in.
But one of my favorite players that I will be trying to go after this in my redrafts. I mean, I'm a big homer, so I'm always going to try to grab Micah Parsons. He is a little expensive, unfortunately, especially in my leagues, my home league, my team, my league mates will always go after Micah Parsons, so I can't have him. But I actually like Montez Sweat a lot from Chicago. He's one of my favorite players coming into this as far as the defensive tackle goes. Right now I think he's D tackle 10, D lineman 10. And I'm okay with that. I think I'm in a 10-man league actually in this one. So I think he's a perfect fit to grab. And I don't feel like I have to spend a lot to get him where I want him.
Mm-hmm. And I think if we're talking redraft here, I want to say he was Khalil Mack at 24. I think Khalil Mack is a good value here. If you can get him 24th overall off the board, we saw him have like 6 sacks in a game last year. Maybe there's some decline in age there. Maybe Joey Bosa gets hurt and Khalil Mack is, again, a big hitter like he was last year. But I just think that Khalil Mack's probably not going anywhere this year. Maybe a dynasty fade a little bit now due to age, but I think we're talking 1 year, 2024 redraft. Khalil Mack at 24 is a nice bargain there. I also like Highsmith at 25 right behind him. I think he's in my rankings, I'd have him in top 15 defensive lineman. I know he didn't get his sacks last year, but he's a really safe tackle floor guy. I think the tackles aren't going anywhere, and I think the sacks do come up this year for Highsmith. So those are 2 guys I also like. Anybody else?
I would say Reddick. Son Reddick, I think I think one, the Jets don't even know where he's at right now. I think last he was Japan, right?
You're
Something
right.
like that. He's just not even showing up. So that's a whole unique situation that you're gonna have to monitor all up through preseason. Like they don't know what's gonna happen with him. And I think honestly, Reddick I think he was a one and done type of guy in Philly. He didn't show up well last season at all, and then I know he went to the Jets, and I just again, a name, right? People recognize the name. They think he had that outstanding season, but I'd grab Granderson. I'd grab I'd grab Gary. There's so many people I would grab before I grab Reddick, especially with the unique situation of him he's doing the Aaron Rodgers on the defensive side right now. He's just doing his own thing, for the Jets. And that organization is a mess right now. I think the only player I'm grabbing from the Jets is Brees Hall and Quincy Williams. That's it. I'm not touching anybody else.
Speaking of, you're right there looking at Reddick, man. I mean, and I noticed when you was naming off guys you'd rather have, you was naming off everybody but Greener. And I'm not a big Greener believer. I don't think his switch to Minnesota is necessarily in his favor, playing across from Hunter, because it's like, just look at any of the guys in the past. I mean, you get good spurts out of them playing across from Hunter, but they never reach that, DL1 type level. So I'm a little bit nervous about that. I wouldn't rank him up there in that top 20 at all. He'd be closer to 32 or something.
They have Van Ginkel too, right? Didn't they get him?
Van Ginkel.
Yeah. If he gets himself healthy, that's another.
Dallas Turner.
To me, Greenard played more of an interior edge rusher than what he did, stand up like Will Anderson did, right? We're talking Houston last year, right? So
yeah.
I don't like that up here. I think we pretty well hit them all.
Yeah. I mean, tier 6, even all the way down to tier 6, there's guys here. So, bottom line is it's early, and maybe that's some discrepancies in these rankings, but take a good look. Even down to tier 6, tier 7, there's guys that are going to be, top 30, top 25 defensive linemen when the season's done. Of course, this is our first circulation into these defensive linemen. This is just redraft season kicking off, so we're going to continue to look at not only defensive linemen but all IDP positions. So stick with us. Thank you for rocking with us. And I wanted to mention to Gary and my co-hosts Steve and Gary, thank you for coming on. Gary, thank you for making a nice guest appearance. It's been a while since we potted, so
thanks for having me.
Great stuff tonight, fellas. And to all those people who are followers, who are subscribers, we appreciate you. And till next time, enjoy, stay safe, and get studying.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.